We're here at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska Museum. We chose to come here because of the fact that many of the fossils found in ash faults, which was such a wonderful place, and answers as many questions that ask, rather, as many questions as it answers. And that is, what are all these African animals doing on this plate, the plate of the Americas? I speak of the surface plates of the earth. Inasmuch as the Ice Age did not cover ashfall or this particular part of Nebraska, many interesting things were found here. And you know the theory that many believe that the plates were all together at one time, basically the land surface, and that this hemisphere broke away from the other hemisphere, that is, we know as Africa. And certainly here in Nebraska, especially at Ashfall, and again, I highly recommend it as a place to visit, to see for yourself the birds, horses, zebra, rhinoceros. And we're going to pick up here in this particular portion of the museum, which is most of the artifacts are from ashfall, and we're going to take a little tour. It would seem they have a wonderful museum here at the University of Nebraska, and we're going to go with it, show you some of the things that they have to offer, some of the things from the ancient past. You remember in ashfall, these animals roamed this hemisphere approximately 10 million years ago, dated on back to 35 million years ago, that there was a volcano eruption in the Idaho area, and the ash from that volcano fell upon this particular area of Nebraska around Ashfall, naturally the name, and basically smothered or diseased because they could not breathe, they could not eat grass because of the depth of the ash. And therefore we have some excellent finds in mineralized fossils from that area. They're pretty well all intact. The carnivores not bothering them. So we have a wonderful opportunity to analyze the animals of Africa in the Americas. How did it happen? Well, the theory that the plates divided is an interesting one. In the Greek, we know the katabo. Is that when it happened? Well, we'll think about it. No one knows for certain, but what an interesting prospect in analyzing these creatures. Okay, let's go with it. All right, let's take time here for a moment just to discuss, as far as a Christian is concerned, what we feel has happened to this earth. It is sad that some would even teach that this earth is only 6,000 years old, which is really ridiculous because you don't understand the Hebrew if that were to be your opinion. Because the Hebrew manuscripts make it very clear that there is no argument between science and God's Word as far as this earth being billions of years old. Now, I want to talk about the plates of the earth. We now have 7 continents. Is it possible at one time there was only one land mass and the rest was water, and the land mass broke apart and actually moved, drifted, shifted, or whatever, through some sort of upheaval that are natural happenings down through the billions of years that the earth has been here? This theory came into being in not too long after the year 1800. It began to be discussed, as you can find interesting articles in many encyclopedias or whatever your library or however you wish to research if you care to take it deeper. I'm just going to graze, if I may, glaze the surface a little bit. It was brought forth about that time, and it was very controversial. It was rejected by so-called scholars of that day that the Earth's plates could shift. Now, I might use an example. The earthquake a couple of years ago that happened out in the Joshua Tree area, some of the earth there moved as much as 10 feet. The entire, if I remember right, and I'm going by memory, the entire city of Los Angeles moved 1 inch. Think about that. Think about it. That to move that vast amount of weight, but then you visualize under the surface at the pressure that builds up by those plates being moved. It would seem that many times when we have an alignment of planets and the moon is a certain way and the tide comes in excessively high, then we have earthquakes or something of that nature because it brings force on the plates of the Earth's surface. So I'm not saying however it happened. I feel basically that it probably happened at as the Greek verb katabolo, that is to say, at Satan's fall. We know that God moved probably the magnetic north, something such a catastrophe that it even moved that. We've seen lesser things that have happened, such as the glancing blow that it would appear happened in Russia itself of a piece of space rock, dirt, or however, whatever, no one really knows what struck it, all right? So here we go then. What about it? Here in Nebraska, at Ash Falls, we have animals, rhinoceroses, we have zebra, and it is not a matter that someone put together a story. My friend, as you know, these animals, every bone is in place, even down to the tail, and I'm thinking about the big barn up at Ashfall. Even the tail of that little horse, every little bone is right in place, just as he fell from suffocation, no doubt, from this fallout from a volcano. That these animals existed in what is today America. How did those animals get here? Because there were apparently no rhinoceroses outside of that time about 10 million years ago. Even the birds of Africa are found with the seed in their mouth. How did they get in Nebraska? So that's why I'm bringing this question forward. And as we're looking here, and we really thank the University of Nebraska for being so open with us and allowing us to film what they have here. But it's a good question. How did they get here? And therefore, I think it reflects a little bit and does not hurt to at least talk about the moving of the plates, the crust of this earth. We know that there is a gradual movement, certainly, but that would not prevent for at one time certainly there to have been a major shift. Now, I want to show you, if I may, a picture of how neatly that we're going to go to some of the clues. That's why I'm going to do this and take a look at it, and then you make your own mind up. This picture that you're going to see here is of Brazil snuggled into West Africa, and you see that it is a perfect fit. It would seem that you could see the crack take place and the two drift apart. I mean, it is almost right on target that we have this. Now, when science takes this one step further, we find ancient stones. I'm not going to go into dates, but it would be billions of years, stones that are billions of years old, found in Brazil, that you can go to the west coast of Africa and you will find the same stone. In other words, the terra firma, the surface of the terra firma, are with the ancient stones, not necessarily the near ancient stones, I will call them, but in the ancient stones, a perfect match. I mean, they could have been the same arêtes, the same terra firma, the same soil, simply cracked apart and moved apart. There is strong evidence of this. Or let me qualify that by saying, by the types of rock that are found in Brazil and in West Africa, it is very obvious that these two continents, these two land masses, could have definitely been joined because of the identical rock formation from the ancient years gone by. That is a point that would strongly work in the favor of the fact that there was a breakup of the continent into continents, that is to say the 7 that we personally have. Even Antarctica itself, as it would drift, as it would move, the Africas and the Americas as we know them today, New Zealand, Australia, they all fit basically, at least if you go down. You see, in recent years we have been able to learn a great deal more of the, I'll call it mountainous terrain, or the rifts or the ridges of the ocean itself, the movement of the plates there, the ring of fire, which is the volcanic ring of fire that drifts up in the great circle, whereby many earthquakes are brought forth from it, and so on and so forth. We have many wonderful mysteries concerning this great planet on which we live. And these are questions that I find fascinating. And when we find these artifacts, these animals, it means something. They got here and are so well preserved, they cannot be denied. And I have no doubt it was God's will that they be here, because they are. Therefore, we have a strong clue, again, that would join with the clue of the rock formations themselves in Brazil and West Africa as another witness that at one time the land masses were together. All right. Animals are able to migrate over distances of land mass, but animals that are strictly land animals and not water animals cannot migrate from one continent to another. So, some way, the animals were on both continents. If it were only one animal, such as, let's say, the rhinoceros, you might say, well, that could certainly be. But when you have the rhinoceros, the 5 types of horses, the very birds of Africa themselves, and even the carnivores of Africa here, then we know we have a very strong clue that at some time, there had to be a vehicle that would possibly transport or have transported these animals. And I'm not talking about a literal vehicle, I'm talking about a vehicle created by a landmass moving. Very possible. So, with these thoughts in mind, consider them. It never, and many would say, well, aren't you afraid your credentials will be tarnished by making a statement? Hey, we're just talking about it. We're only saying, is it possible? Certainly it's possible. There are enough proofs of the likeness of the land masses that certainly, anyone that has any wisdom at all would have to say, well, let's at least talk about it and see if we can come to a better understanding. Well, basically, that's what we're doing here. This is one of the reasons that we go out into the field, that we look at artifacts, because many times artifacts and ancient writing in stone, petroglyphs, pictographs, say a great deal more than is written about history. You should always think for yourself and never be afraid to discuss a subject. That's what we're doing. So, I hope that you enjoy this display here at the University of Nebraska. I want to just say one word about it. It is basically a museum that you can walk through, and they have done such an excellent job of displaying the various artifacts and skeletal remains that your group, if it is a group that you bring or whatever, can move through, and it's self-explanatory. I have to give it that. It's one of the things that makes the museum at the University of Nebraska, I think, a little different than some museums. That it certainly, a lot of work and effort has gone into explaining the various displays, the ages, so on and so forth. So, I hope you enjoy it. The University of Nebraska Museum and the artifacts that we find here. Let's move on now and enjoy the museum. Today, what we call the Western horse certainly was not the first horse that appeared in this hemisphere. For, as you remember, in the asphalt area, many remains of three-toed, well, there were 5 variety of horses. Here you have the Eocene, which is known as the Dawn horse, and we have life size here before us. And I'll hold my hand here so that you can get an idea. We're looking at a medium-sized dog of today. Would be about the size of this Dawn horse in the actual life size. Let's focus in a moment here, if we may, on the Oligocene horse cast from Nebraska. Note the 3 toes. Note the 3 toes of these animals. And yet they are today what we would call the horse family. The Dawn horse, they were in Wyoming, found in Wyoming as well as Nebraska. And here we see the Nebraska Oligocene. Let's go over here to the Wyoming Eocene here, Eocene, horse cast. And you notice here we have 4 toes on the 2 animals that are the furthest to our left there, and 3 toes on these various animals. So we had considerable types of horses in this hemisphere. Again, many of them being the same from Africa. What an interesting possibility that brings up. Now let's move on here, if we may, to a middle Oligocene fossil horse. This is from the Sioux country, and we see again in its running stance a horse. We see one of the 4-toed horses that came from the Sioux country. Here we come to the upper Miocene, the fossil 3-toed horse. We see a considerably larger horse, equivalent in size probably what we would call a Shetland pony of today. One of these that roamed the Americas. 3-toed horse, Miocene, found in Dawes County here in Nebraska. We're going to move along here to another 3-toed fossil horse, the Middle Miocene. This also from Dawes County. And we can see that probably there were herds of these animals, much as you see video today of Africa itself as certain animals such as zebra and others that migrate together. And here we have the Miocene, three-toed horse. I want to show you a cast, if I may, of the Miocene horse cast. And you will note that the hoof then begins to look more as a hoof that we would have today, or of a modern day zebra. Not exact, but certainly in the family. And these are cast here. The horse himself was not a cast. Okay, we're going to move on along then. We're going to come up into a much larger animal. We have a fossil horse. And we will say this is from the Pleistocene, found in Sheridan County here. And we see a much larger horse, and note the hoof, if you would. Can we zero in kind of, well, we have cast here. We'll zero in on that in a moment. But coming on up to size of much like a close brother to the horse that we have at this time. This animal found here in Nebraska, what an interesting area these plains must have been. We're going to zero in, and I want you to see a left hind foot and a left forefoot of this Pleistocene horse. Here, the left hind, which we see the stronger bone structure, and then in the left fore, we see in other words, we have a horse here that would be comparable in size to a small horse of today. Again, the plains of Nebraska, as they wandered, as they grazed, as they lived millions of years ago in this great state of Nebraska. This should remind you of our visit to Asphalt. It would seem they have done an excellent job by bringing this much as it was found at Asphalt in a plaster of Paris mold here. And remember how we saw even the younger rhinoceros, some of them right beside their mothers as they were brought to that situation where the ash was so deep that they died, they suffocated in that particular area. Asphalt, don't miss it. Animals of Africa in the Americas, how fantastic. We have here an artist conception of approaching Asphalt in northern Nebraska 10 million years ago. The landscape is based on evidence collected in the ash bed as it is today. Again, an area that is very easy to affix the correct data because of the excellent condition and preservation of the fossils found there, with the baby rhino being an example thereof. Lush pasture, wonderful water, until the dreadful day that the eruption took place and the asphalt was approaching, the ash itself in the background approaching this beautiful area, which brought to the extinction of these beautiful animals. Okay, we're going to move to a fossil of a rhinoceros that was in Weld County, Colorado, was the place it was found. Ancestral rhinoceros. The Trigonius appears to be ancestral to the true rhinoceros. This form was the most common type of rhinoceros in what is now Nebraska and Colorado about 40 million years ago. Although today rhinoceroses live only in the old world tropics, Africa that is to say, as well as other places, there were numerous species living in the northern climates during the geological past. Rhinoceroses became extinct in Northern America just prior to the Ice Age, approximately 1 million years ago. And here you have an excellent specimen of that rhinoceros. Here we have a long-limbed rhino, and from the middle Miocene, and from Bridgeport out of Merrill County, Nebraska. During the lower and middle Miocene, 20 to 15 million years ago, rhinoceroses of this type were abundant in what is now Nebraska. And certainly we see here the long-limbed rhinoceros. The female skulls were hornless, as illustrated by the skeleton to the right. And we'll see in the background the male and the female. Very much as the rhinoceros of today. From Nebraska. Amazing. Now we're going to move along to the short-legged rhinoceros. And this from the middle Pliocene, Ash Hollow Formation, from Brown County in Nebraska. The Tullichreus differed from other late territorial rhinoceroses in having an immense barrel-like body and externally short legs. It was a slow-moving, clumsy animal resembling a hippopotamus, and must have spent much of its time in the ancient Pliocene rivers of the Great Plains. The short-legged rhinoceros, quite a chubby-looking little creature. We're moving along now to the giant rhinoceros. The giant rhinoceros, also about middle Pliocene, the age, from an Ash Hollow Formation from Banner County, Nebraska. This specimen is the largest mounted skeleton of an American rhinoceros. Alf Hillops was one of the late survivors of the rhinoceroses on this continent. The rough hind area at the tip of the nasals indicate that the animal possessed a horn. That's on the head, as you can see here in the nasal area. The largest skeletal remains fossilized, the Alhilos rhinoceros in the Americas. Again, this brings to the point the question of the plates of this great earth. Inasmuch as they are extinct today and yet still exist in the tropics and in the areas of Africa and other areas, it makes us wonder, is it true that the areas and the destruction that was brought by the ketebil, I'll use the Greek verb, on the continents and the plates of this great world. How fascinating this earth, millions of years old, as we go into that first earth age that everyone should be aware of. Okay, here we have one of the larger boys, Titanotheres, which means he's a great big boy, found from the Nebraska Badlands. The bones of this particular Titanotheres have, and as long with many others, have been found in great numbers in Sioux and Dawes counties in northwestern Nebraska. The largest of these animals were over 6 feet high at the shoulders and exceeded in bulk the largest living rhinoceroses. They were the largest land mammals living in North America during their span of existence from the Eocene through early Oligocene. They became extinct at the end of the early Oligocene about 31 million years ago. They were odd-toed, hoofed animals related to rhinoceroses and horses, but not ancestral to any living animals. Note that their teeth are very low crowned. Again, very low crown, suggesting that they could eat only soft vegetation. The large bony knobs on the skull were present in both sexes and were probably covered with heavily calloused skin in life. They probably function as weapons in butting contests. Their eyes were small and presumably weak, as in the rhinos. The reason for their extinction remains unknown. In Nebraska, the titanosaurs fossils are found only in the Cadron Formation shown in the background painting, and you see in the background that area. The largest of them, and quite a tall. I'm going to walk in front. I'm 6'4", 6'5" with shoes on. So you can see that for a rhinoceros, this was quite a creature. Nebraska, again, relative to the very rhinoceros of today in the Africas. Okay, here today you have an armadillo that you see along roadsides, especially if you're in the South, along down in Texas and so forth. And I want you to compare that with an ancient armadillo, not known as an armadillo, but certainly so you can compare it with this particular animal. And here you see the size in comparison. And I'm going to slip by so I can see what era this comes from. We have it about 7,000 years ago. About 7,000 years ago. And certainly you can see, was it, the average citizen would say, well, is it from the turtle family? No, it would be from the armadillo. And these particular creatures are typically South American mammals. During the period of about 7,000 years ago, they migrated to North America along with their cousins, the armadillos, and the ground sleuths. Over the newly formed land bridge, during that period of time, the Ice Age, this particular creature lived as far north as Texas and Florida. They became extinct about 7,000 years ago. The most striking feature about this particular creature, aside from their giant size, is the unusual development of their defensive armor, which is far more complete and massive than the armadillos. This is one you really wouldn't want to find beside the road, because you would really have a fender bender if you were to hit one of these. At the same time, and from that same period, okay, the giant sloth. The giant sloth were slow-moving, clumsy mammals with large claws on their feet. The front feet rested on the knuckles and the rear feet on the outside borders. The claws and soles turned inward. The teeth of these sloths were very simple and pig-like. The diet of ground sloths consisted of leaves, twigs, and grasses. Sloth skins have been discovered in dry caves in both of the Americas. The thick skins were studded with small, embedded, bony nodules and were covered with coarse yellow-brown hair. Sloths were the dominant mammals of tropical and subtropical America for many millions of years. They developed in South America and migrated northward about 7,000 years ago in the land bridge, invading the Great Plains as far north as Nebraska. Fossilized sloth bones are commonly found in this state, especially in the areas of and counties in this great state. Ground sloths became extinct on both continents about 7,000 years ago. Okay, here we have a hornless deer with an unborn fawn. Note the unborn fawn in the womb, or what that was the womb of this hornless deer. From Dawes County, most living creatures die without leaving any permanent physical record of their existence. Fossilization is a rare event, especially the preservation of complete skeletons like this one. Fossils that capture a moment shortly before an animal gives birth are truly exceptional. The dramatic specimen of a small deer-like mammal was found by L.G. Turner near Crawford in 1938. I want to move up just a little bit, if I may. We have a camel story. This is a small jaw and a large jaw. The large jaw is about 3.5 million years old. Camels lived in what is now Nebraska for about 35 million years, leaving a record of their evolution buried in old sediments and rocks. These two lower jaws belong to the smallest and the largest species of the extinct camels so far discovered by Nebraska paleontologists. The small jaw is from an area of badlands near Bathwater. The large jaw was collected from shoreline deposits of an ancient lake near Lisco. Notice the very small and the very large. Here we have a hornless rhino. This ancient rhinoceros skull was found in the Little Badlands north of Crawford. The small nasal bones show that the pig-sized animal had no horn. Now, let's move along here. Notice we've mentioned 5 different types of horses found in this area. Here we have a mini horse skull from the Badlands. The oldest horse skulls from Nebraska are found in layers of volcanic mudstone that date back between 35 million years ago. These little ancestral horses had 3 hooves, that is to say toes, on each foot. Their teeth had short crowns adapted to a diet of soft leaves. And fossil eggs found in Dawes County as well as Scotts Bluff in Sioux and Dawes County. Fossil eggs are rarer than fossil bones or teeth because eggs are usually destroyed before they can be preserved. The elongate ones were probably laid by waterfowl, and the round ones by large tortoises. They were buried very quickly in volcanic mudstone before they had a chance to hatch. And of course, again, here we have the African bird documented here as being in this hemisphere. I want to talk about a big bear, the big bear story, from Cass County in Nebraska. This is the upper arm bone of a gigantic bear of the Ice Age. Extinct short-faced bears like this were far larger than modern bears. This huge specimen is from the largest individual carnivorous mammal on record. Its owner had an estimated live weight of well over a ton, more than twice as much as the largest living bears. Here we have frozen in time, a turtle that you would see even today from Dawes County, Nebraska. These 5-pound turtles are displayed exactly as they were found in a bed of sandstone northwest of Marshland. Most fossilized turtles consist of only the shell. Specimens like these with the skulls and limbs preserved are extremely rare. If you want to talk about a real wisdom tooth story, here is a mammoth wisdom tooth. This enormous tooth weighing 35 pounds was found in William Schmidt gravel pit near the Elkhorn River by Mrs. Frances Sutherland in 1948. Its shape identifies it as the third molar or wisdom tooth of a young adult mammoth. Mammoths were close relatives of living Asian elephants and thrived in North America during the, plus 7,000 years. They are the largest Nebraska land mammals and have been declared the official state fossil. Little unusual, you'll find next to this the helmet-headed musk ox. This was found in a gravel pit along the Republican River near McCook. They have yielded abundant fossil remains of the Ice Age mammals. One example in this is this skull, which belongs to the extinct species of a giant horn, long-legged musk ox. We're going to move back geographically here to the tar pits of Rancho La Brea, California. We're looking now at the dire wolf. It was about the same size as the modern timber wolf. It lived at the same time and in the same area as the saber-toothed cat. Both of these carnivores were preyed on the animals that lived around the tar pits and tar seeps, and sometimes became trapped in the sticky tar with their prey, and therefore excellent specimens. Here we have from the tar pits also a saber-toothed cat. This saber-toothed cat had the largest canines of any of the saber-toothed cats from the Ice Age. It was as large as the modern lion and fed chiefly on large animals. The lower jaw was capable of opening wide enough to completely expose the long sabers for stabbing. As we move along here, we find a fossil bison, and a fulsome point was used to kill this bison. A replica is positioned in the original imprint of the sandy soil encasing the animal's skeleton. It appears as when first exposed prior to collection. You will note, as it was found, the point, called a fulsome point, probably from an atlatl of that period. Okay, here we have a pronghorn, and this happens to be from the state of Arizona, and very unusual pronghorned animal. Next to it we have a cave deer, and it's from the Guadalupe Mountains of New Mexico. Here we have the Irish deer here at the Nebraska Museum. This deer was as large as a modern moose. The antlers were the largest of any deer. These animals roamed Western Europe, and their bones have been found in the peat bogs of Ireland. These deer are probably known as the Irish elk. Next to this, we have the giant beaver from Sheridan County, Nebraska. Large beaver indeed. We have many relatives of the elephant. We're going to start here first with the African elephant. Jaws show how elephants evolved. The first ones were small and had short tusks, as you will see in the display. More than 200 extinct species have been found in rocks spanning over 45 million years. Many later ones had ivory shovels, scoops, prods, and hoes. Others lost the lower tusk as the trunk developed. Only 2 species of elephants are alive today. Probably there's one of the finer examples of the shovel and the scoop tusk that you will find anywhere on existence. To show you here, Nebraska has the most complete fossil record of elephant evolution of any state in the Union. Elephant fossils have been found in 90 of Nebraska's 93 counties. We're going to start, we have here a prod tusker, an example found here, and we're going to move around as the evolution continued. These found in Nebraska. There, my friend, you have a prod tusker. Here we have a long-jawed tuska. Only elephants have true ivory tusk. Modern elephants have a pair of tusks in the lower jaws, whereas many extinct elephants also had a pair in the lower jaw. Elephants used their tusk for feeding, fighting, and digging for water and mineral salts. This mammal tusk was found near Omaha in Douglas County. A fantastic specimen. There you have it, the long-jawed tuska of Nebraska. Okay, here we have the perfect tuska. Like giraffes, perfect tuskers could feed on treetops beyond the reach of other animals. They stood taller than earlier elephants and probably had a long trunk. Notice the relatively short jaw. Short jaws allowed room for the evolution of a long trunk. This is the world's only mounted skeleton of a perfect tuska. And you will notice that as the evolution continued, we have a larger fossilized remains here. This happens to be the stegomastodon. Most animals don't live long enough to die of old age. Look at the skull on the floor to your left. Its worn teeth show that the animal was very old when it died. It must have had a stiff neck because the neck vertebrae are fused. The stegomastodons were the last of the four tuskas. And view those tusks, if you will. And here would be our claim to fame, known as the American mastodon. Mastodons roamed North America until they mysteriously became extinct about 10,500 years ago. Climate was becoming dramatically warmer and drier as the last glaciers retreated. The first North American people hunted both mastodons and mammoths during this time. Did the hunters contribute to the extinction of these giants? Animals already stressed by climate changes might have been very vulnerable to their hunting. And here we move to a mammoth. Compared to earlier elephants, mammoths are built like long-distance runners, tall and slender. They dominated the vast grasslands of the northern hemisphere. They are the largest grazing mammals that ever lived. Our next mammoth that we will be approaching is the largest one ever mounted for observation. Ready? Here you have the imperial mammoth. I stand at 6'4", and I can barely reach what we would call the knee of the mammoth. Very large. This skeleton lays claim to fame as being the largest mounted mammoth in any American museum. Elegant giants were the largest mammals known to have walked the Great Plains. Mammoths are the Nebraska state fossil. And certainly one of the reasons I would recommend the Nebraska State Museum is for this collection alone, not even taking into consideration the beautiful specimens from asphalt of rhinoceros, African animals in America. Okay. You'll remember from ashfall we found several species of camel. Here you have a giant camel from about 8,000 years ago to 8 million to 10 million. And this particular animal, which is a giant camel, was found in Garden County, Nebraska. Again, amazing that we find these animals that we usually think from the Middle East or from Africa in the Americas. One of the things that are abundant here in Nebraska as well are tortoises, fossil-shelled turtles, we'll call them. It is amazing that we have fossil antelopes, proving that antelopes were here long ago. another fossil horse, and that would be the three-toed variety, about 10 million years ago. And of course, a very large turtle we have here that would be from about 9-10 million years ago. All right, here we're going to quietly slip into this room, the Stegosaurus right here. As we move around, there is a class, a college class here in the display room, and we're simply going to quietly put the audio to this as the class continues to study. If you were to bring a group, you would find that here we have vertebrae from the Allosaur, that is to Saur, and from various animals of past history. You have man-made likenesses of these. But here at the University of Arizona, you have plates and panels that are very much explanatory, such as this, as to what you are looking at, such as the Allosaur here, and the time period in which it roamed here in North America. And for college classes, church groups, or whatever, one of the best displays, most of the animals are mounted, and then here a likeness of the various animals that lived many thousands of years ago in this earth age. So what a wonderful place for a class to study and have their subject so well laid out before their very eyes. Nomads of the plains, cultures change. Sometimes they change slowly, sometimes quickly. But cultures are always changing. For more than 10,000 years, plains cultures change very slowly from a nomadic lifestyle based on bison and wild plants to a more a simpler pattern which included cultivation of corn and other plants. Of course, food always being the mainstay thereof. Suddenly there was an invasion by Europeans from Spain, England, France, and the introduction of guns and whiskey in the East changed the indigenous balance of power and forced some groups to move westward. The Omaha Atto and Ponca filtered into the eastern plains before our year 1700. The Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Sioux came later and quickly established their nomadic lifestyle based upon horses, introduced by the Spanish invasion of the Southwest and guns of the East. Subsequently, the expanding American nation forced Indians onto reservations and tried to make them become farmers, partly because the lands were often unsuitable. These changes met with little success. Even after military defeats and cultural domination, many Indians retained their basic identity and beliefs. Today, there is a reaccession of Indian identity and Indian pride, which should be recognized and honored by Americans of all colors. We hope that what you see in these particular film will bring that. You'll remember the Raven Sight documentary that we did in Springerville, Arizona will tie in with this as we see the Plains Indians and from the community that we documented in Springerville, Arizona. All right, I hope you've enjoyed our tour of the museum here at the University of Nebraska. And you can always write or call the museum here at the university. And I'm sure that you would be most welcome in making prior arrangements for groups and so forth as far as times that the museum is open and so forth. And if you're traveling through this part of the country, be sure that you stop by the museum here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And don't miss, my friends, if you drive in the northern part of Nebraska, the Ash Falls State Park. It is a fantastic, it's one of the best exhibits you're going to find anywhere. I wish to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Judy Diamond for her gracious help in this and her permission to allow us the freedom of the museum to bring the displays of the museum to you. We certainly enjoyed it. I hope you have enjoyed it. Nebraska, she's a great state, and one in driving through that you have much to see and a lot of history. So we thank the University of Nebraska for the privilege of allowing us to document their museum whereby you could enjoy it. We certainly have enjoyed being here and doing this for you. Many questions it brings out. The mammoth, the shovel bill, that is to say, rather than tusk to have the shovel and even like a hoe, all the various things and the questions that rise and are answered even. But it educates us in this beautiful earth that God has created for our pleasure and our enjoyment. Don't fail to get out and visit some of the natural sites and the wonderful museums. Collections that much sweat and heartache from the field of archaeology and the hard works of men and women, boys and girls that have gone on through the years bringing these relics, artifacts to us. Enjoy them. It's our nation. It's our country. She's a great nation, our America. How I love her and how I love to visit her. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dr. Judy Diamond and the University of Nebraska.